Hey guys, my name is Trevor Sullivan. I'm a senior applied engineer with Deepgram, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the Amazon SageMaker deployment model for Deepgram services. Now you might be wondering, why would I want to use Amazon SageMaker to deploy Deepgram as opposed to other options? Well, to give you a quick overview of the different options that we have available, first of all, the easiest way to use Deepgram is simply to sign up for a free account at deepgram.com, and you can use our US or EU based endpoints. Now, you can also self host Deepgram as long as you have an enterprise contract. Self hosting allows you to run a container based deployment model where you can deploy using something like Docker Compose on a standalone host, or you can also deploy to a Kubernetes cluster that's a little bit more scalable. Now, if you want something that's even easier and you're already an AWS customer, then the Amazon SageMaker platform allows you to very easily deploy a totally air-gapped environment for Deepgram speech-to-text and text-to-speech services. So if you're familiar with our models like Nova 3 for audio transcription or Aura-2, which is used for text-to-speech synthesis, then you can actually deploy those models directly through the SageMaker platform. And that's what we're going to demonstrate in this particular video. So the SageMaker platform is an easy way to get it deployed into AWS. It also allows you to deploy into an AWS VPC environment. So if you have particular compliance requirements like FedRAMP, for example, then the SageMaker hosting model can help make that possible for you. So for starters, you'll want to reference our documentation over at developers.deepgram.com. If you head over to the self-hosted deployments section here, this has an entire section that talks about the SageMaker platform and how you can deploy Deepgram services on it. So we're going to follow through on this deploy Deepgram on Amazon SageMaker document right here. There's a few high-level steps, and once you go through the process 2 or 3 times, it'll feel like second nature to you, but there are just some unique terms in the AWS ecosystem, specifically in SageMaker as a service, that you'll want to be familiar with. So we'll kind of walk through the process, and hopefully that'll get you on your feet so that you can deploy it yourself into your own AWS account. So for starters, what we're going to do is click on this link under supported products right here, and this is going to take us out to the AWS Marketplace, and this has all of our public listings that are currently available. You don't have to be logged into your AWS account to view this page, but once you're logged into your AWS account, as you can see, I am up in the top right here, you'll be able to subscribe to these products. Now, each of these products is going to have either a public offer, which is the base retail pricing, or if you have a negotiated contract with Deepgram, then you can also have a private offer that we can send directly to your AWS account as well. So feel free to experiment with the public pricing model, and then once you're ready to start scaling your business out with Deepgram services, then you can sign a contract and get private pricing as well. So what we're going to do in this particular case is look through our product listings here for the text-to-speech, which is Aura-2, Aura-2 right here. And so we have Aura-2 English. We also have Aura-2 for a couple of other languages as well. So we've got Aura-2 text-to-speech for Spanish, and then we also have what we call the polyglot model, which supports a variety of different other languages. And you can see all of those in our documentation. So for now, just for simplicity, we are going to go ahead and deploy the Aura-2 English product. So let's start by drilling into the product details for Aura-2, and then we'll go over to view purchase options. And that's going to show us where we have either the public pricing option or the private pricing. And so in this particular case, in my development account, I have a private pricing agreement. So I've already accepted that. So it shows up as a purchased offer. I've already accepted that agreement. But if you click on what's available over here, this is where you'll see the public offer. And there is also a 14-day free trial for our solutions. So you can deploy a SageMaker endpoint and get a 14-day free trial for that through the marketplace here. So I've already subscribed to this, but normally you would just click on the public offer, and then there'll be a button somewhere towards the bottom to accept that offer. And of course, in this case, it's grayed out since I already have a private offer for this same exact product in my development account. So once you've subscribed to that in the marketplace interface in AWS, that's going to show up as a product inside of the AWS console, specifically the SageMaker AI console in your AWS account. So we're going to switch over to the AWS Management Console here, and you want to start by choosing a region where you want to deploy your SageMaker endpoint to. Now, again, you do have the option to deploy a SageMaker endpoint into a VPC environment, but the default option for deploying a SageMaker endpoint is simply to make it a public resource. It's still encrypted using TLS, and it's still secured using AWS Identity and Access Management. So you have to have valid access credentials in order to access the inference endpoint or API for your SageMaker endpoint once it's been deployed. So it's still secure, even though it's public, but you can also opt to deploy it into a VPC. But in this particular case, we're just going to stick with the default and make it public. So for starters, there's a lot of different options over here on the sidebar in the SageMaker AI console. So don't get too overwhelmed with that if you're brand new to SageMaker. A lot of these things we don't even use in the Deepgram deployment process here. So for starters, what we're going to do is go down to AWS Marketplace Resources, go to Marketplace Model Packages, and then there's a separate tab here called AWS Marketplace Subscriptions. This has the list of the products that we've subscribed to through the AWS Marketplace interface, which is what we just did back over here on this screen. So as you can see, I've already accepted offers, either public offers or private offers for each of these products that's listed here. So what you're going to do is choose the product that you want to deploy, and then there's a several step process that we're going to go through, and all of this is documented over here in this deployment documentation. So once you've subscribed to the product, you're then also going to need to create what's called an IAM execution role. So we'll actually go ahead and do that first really quickly. This is actually a really easy step. It's part of just the base requirements for AWS deployments. So what we're going to do is actually head over to the IAM console really quick. And if you head over to roles, you just click on create role here. And under the trusted entity type, you're going to choose the default, which is AWS service, and then just grab the SageMaker service. And you can just use the default SageMaker execution role. So what this is, it's essentially a application identity that gets associated with your SageMaker endpoint at deployment time so that it has the necessary access to all of the backend SageMaker APIs in your AWS account so that it can operate correctly. So this is just part of the base setup of the SageMaker platform. So let's go ahead and hit next here. And then we'll just give it a name at the end. So it's going to have this default policy applied right there. And then we'll give it a name. So I'll just call this 2026-05 Trevor SageMaker execution. And you can give it a custom description if you want to, and some resource tags if you'd like to. Then we'll just click on Create Role. And then once we've done that, we can use that role in our deployment process. So now what we're going to do is head back over to the SageMaker AI console. We're done with IAM for now. And we're going to go ahead and click on the product here, text-to-speech English. And we're going to start by choosing actions and then create model. Now, what create model does here is it essentially just imports the Deepgram model that is packaged up in the AWS Marketplace into your AWS account as a local resource. So what you're going to see in the AWS SageMaker console is a model resource that's imported from the package that we provide on the marketplace. So for the model name here, I'm just going to call this Aura-2 or maybe Deepgram Aura-2 English, maybe TTS-English there, just so we know it's a text-to-speech model as opposed to STT. And then for the IAM role here, this is the SageMaker execution role that we just created. So I'm going to choose this one that I just created right here that's got all this permissions automatically set up for me. There is also that button right there to guide you through that role creation wizard if you did not do that as a prerequisite, but it's usually just easier to get that out of the way up front and then, go through the process a little bit more seamlessly here. And then for the container definition here, it's simply going to be a reference. So the default option here, because we chose the radio button on the marketplace subscription in the previous screen, it's automatically going to populate the marketplace package here. So you don't have to choose anything here. This is where you would select a VPC. If you do select a VPC, you'll also have to choose which subnets and which VPC security groups you want to open up as well. But for now, we're just going to use the default non-VPC option. And then you also have the opportunity to add any resource tags here. So if this is related to a particular team in your organization or a particular project, feel free to add whatever resource tags are appropriate there to classify your different resources across your organization. So I typically like to just add an owner tag to my resources so that the other teammates in my environment here know exactly who has been working with this. So then we'll click on the Create Model button down here, and that's going to import the model into my account here. So as you can see, we've got this Deepgram Aura-2 TTS English model. And the next step in the process, once we've created the model, is going to be to create what's called an endpoint configuration. So the endpoint configuration just has some additional properties, and it actually references the model that we just created here. So you can either click on the model and then say create endpoint configuration, or you can head over to deployments and inference. You can go straight to endpoint configurations, and you can just hit create endpoint configuration, at which point you'll be prompted to create what's called a variant, and then you can create a variant based on that model. So it doesn't really matter which route you take. It ultimately achieves the same objective here, but it does give you a couple of different navigation paths to get to that point. So we'll go ahead and go back to our models. Let me see if I can find that here. So we'll go to deployable models. There it is. And then we'll hit the radio button and say create endpoint configuration. And I'll call this 2026-05 Trevor Aura-2 TTS English. We're going to leave it at provisioned because we don't support the serverless endpoint model at the moment. And then down here, you're going to see that the variant is pre-populated because it already knows which model we are using. However, one of the things that you're going to need to customize here is the instance type. And because Deepgram runs on NVIDIA GPUs, we need to make sure that we choose an NVIDIA GPU instance type in the Amazon EC2 service. So if you scroll to the right here and click under Actions, hit Edit, you can customize the variant name. I'll just call this prod01. And then we'll choose a different instance type right here. And you can choose something like a G6.12x large and click on Save. And then that's going to choose, if we scroll back over, that's going to update the instance type field here to G6.12x large. So now when we deploy this, it's going to use that instance type. You can actually add more variants. So if you wanted to deploy, let's say, maybe 2 G6.12x larges and then 3 G5.12x larges, you could do that as well by creating 2 different variants that reference 2 different EC2 instance types. But that's a little bit more of an advanced topic. For now, we're just going to keep things at a single instance. And then again, you can add a resource tag to the endpoint configuration meta resource. Then we'll hit create endpoint configuration. And then finally, we're going to take that endpoint configuration here, and we are going to deploy an actual endpoint. So to do that, we're going to head over to endpoints. The endpoint itself is the actual compute resource, the actual deployment of the model. So that's going to incur the billing of the compute resource that you've selected. So far, the model that we imported and the endpoint configuration resource that we created, those are non-billable resources. They're just meta resources that describe the configuration that we're going to deploy when we actually create the endpoint resource. So let's hit create endpoint here. And I'm going to call this 2026-05 Trevor Aura-2 TTS English. And then we can choose which endpoint configuration we want to use. And because we pre-created that, we don't have to create a new one as part of this wizard. We can just say use the existing configuration that I just created right here. So we'll select that one and click on the select button. That will apply it. And then we can just add a resource tag to our endpoint here. And finally, we'll just hit the Create Endpoint button in the bottom right, and that's going to deploy the actual compute resource. Now, at this point, it's going to take several minutes, typically about 4.5 to 5 minutes for the endpoint to actually become live. There's some deployment that happens in the background in the AWS platform. It has to unzip all of the model files for Deepgram. It has to grab the container image for Deepgram and actually deploy that onto an Amazon EC2 instance, which it also has to obtain capacity for. And that's actually another topic that we need to cover, which is capacity. If you run into any capacity issues where maybe you try to deploy an endpoint, but you get an error due to insufficient quota, then you'll actually want to check your quota in your AWS account. So while this is deploying, let's switch over to the quota console here. So we'll go to service quotas in the unified search here. And under service quotas, this is where you can request additional instance quota for SageMaker endpoints. So what you're going to want to do is go to AWS services, and then we're going to search for SageMaker right here. And by the way, we do have an article on this called Requesting SageMaker Quota. So feel free to check this out if you need a reference. And back over here under service quotas, once you've gone to the SageMaker platform here, all you need to do is either search for endpoints or endpoint, and this is going to list all of the different supported instance types for deployment of SageMaker endpoints. And so there's a lot of different CPU-only instance types here that do not have any NVIDIA GPUs in them. We want to ignore those. The ones that we're focused on are the G5.12x large. And so you'll see G5 12x large for endpoint usage. That's the one that we care about in order to deploy Deepgram services. Or if I wanted to use G6, it would be G6.12x, and then I could see G6 12x large for endpoint usage. And just so you know, the 12x large has 4 GPUs. Deepgram TTS uses 2 GPUs. And so if you're running a transcription service like the Flux model or the Nova 3 models, which are also available in the AWS Marketplace, you actually only need a single GPU, in which case you can use a G6.2x large instead. So you'd want to go to the G6.2x large, make sure that you have adequate quota for that if you're using one of the transcription models. There's also the G6E instance family. And so you could do G6E.2x large or 12x large, and make sure that you have the appropriate quantity for endpoint usage in the SageMaker service. So that's how you check your quota for GPU instances, and then you can go ahead and go into that. And if you need to increase that, so let's say I needed to go from 10 to 15 or something like that, I can just click on this button here and say, hey, I need 15 of these instances, and then click on this request button right here. All right, so that is how you request additional quota. Our documentation does cover the different instance types that we use, at least for the transcription models here. The TTS models need at least 2 GPUs, so that's why we use the 12x large instances instead. And we do also have some detailed docs down here on how to actually increase your quota. Now, once the SageMaker endpoint has been deployed, we need to validate that it's actually functioning correctly. And there's a few different tools that we have available to us in order to accomplish that. So first of all, we can take a look at the logs. So if you click on this article in our documentation, again, under self-hosted SageMaker, it's called Observability for Amazon SageMaker. And this is where we talk about CloudWatch logs and the CloudWatch metrics that are available to help you monitor availability of your endpoint. So CloudWatch logs just gives you a raw view into the actual container logs. If you were to self-host Deepgram on a Kubernetes cluster, you would actually see all these container logs for our inference engine, our API server, and things of that nature. And so we can actually see all of that directly in CloudWatch logs. And that can be really helpful for troubleshooting purposes. In case you run across an error, maybe you specified an incorrect parameter or something, those logs can be really useful in determining exactly what went wrong. So when you deploy an Amazon SageMaker endpoint, you automatically get integration with CloudWatch logs and CloudWatch metrics for monitoring the endpoint. And as you can see, in just a couple of minutes here, this endpoint has already gone to in service. And you'll see this link here, model container logs. This is going to take us straight over to the CloudWatch logs console where we can break down the individual instances in our environment. So if you remember, when we created our endpoint configuration resource, we called that production variant. We called it prod01. And then we have a uniquely generated instance ID here that represents the EC2 instance that's actually backing our SageMaker endpoint. So that's the I-0392, etc. number right here. That is our instance ID. And you can't set that. That's just auto-generated by the AWS platform. But every single time that a new instance is spun up, either by auto-scaling or by the SageMaker platform simply rotating your instance over a period of time, you will see a new log stream pop up under this log group. That's kind of the parent resource, is the group. And then each of the individual instances gets its own stream. So because we just deployed this, we only have a single stream for a single instance. But if we had 2 instances, we would see 2 streams. If we had 3 instances, we would see 3 streams. And so these are the raw container logs that we can see from the SageMaker endpoint. And if you go to the very beginning of the logs right here, you'll get some really basic troubleshooting information. So for example, I can see a list of all the Deepgram model files that were actually detected by the product and ultimately get loaded by the SageMaker inference engine, or the Deepgram inference engine running in SageMaker right here. And so it basically goes through a startup and validation process of each of the model files, and then it kind of stabilizes and it is listening for connections. So now that we've used the logs to verify that it's actually up and running and we're getting good container logs from our SageMaker endpoint running Aura-2 English, we can go ahead and actually run inference against it. So to accomplish that, we're going to switch over to the inference context here. We have a GitHub organization here called Deepgram-devs, and there's a repository under there called DG-SageMaker. So this is a public repository. You can go out there, leave a star on it so that you can remember it in the future or bookmark it in your browser or whatever you need to do. And what we're going to do is clone this repository locally, right? So we're going to grab the SSH URL here. We're going to head over to our terminal here. And of course, I've already got it cloned, but normally you would just do a git clone and you would clone that SSH URI. So if I just do a git pull here, I'll just make sure I've got the latest version. Of course, I already do because I ran that before the video. And so now that I've got this locally, in PowerShell here, I'll just do get child item, and I have this Python TTS directory. So let's go into Python TTS, and we are going to be using a package manager called UV to actually run the script here. So we have a script called TTS stress.py, and it's basically just a stress test script to execute against your TTS endpoint to make sure that everything is working. And so what we're going to do is to make sure we have the package manager. If you go to docs.astral.sh/uv, you can just go to installation and grab the UV package manager. It just makes dependency management in Python super simple. You don't have to worry about pip commands and all that type of stuff. UV just kind of handles it for you with the pyproject.toml file that's included in each of our projects, like this. So once we have UV installed, we can do a UV run on TTS stress.py. And you also need to make sure that you have your AWS credentials configured locally as well. So let me actually make sure that I do that really quickly. Okay, so now that I've got my credentials all set up right here, I can go ahead and specify all the parameters to the TTS stress test script. Now, a lot of these are optional parameters, but one of the most important ones is going to be the region. We need to make sure that we specify the region where our TTS endpoint exists, and we also need to specify the name of the endpoint resource itself. We can also specify an input text file here, and that's going to be the text that is actually spoken into the API. And then if we want to, we can also specify the number of connections that we want. So how many streaming connections do we want? Do we want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? And then we can also specify out of those connections, out of those, let's say 5 connections, which of those connections do we actually want to play back through my local audio playback device? Maybe I'm wearing Bluetooth headphones, whatever. Maybe I'm just using my MacBook Pro speakers. It's just going to play back through that device, the specified stream. And then you can also specify a duration, and you can also customize which voice you are going to use. And because we chose English, we can use any of the supported voices that are in the Deepgram documentation. If we head over to Deepgram docs and then go to text to speech, and then we check out voices and languages, we have a full list of all of the different supported featured voices, as well as all available voices right here. So you can either play the samples right here, you can go out to playground.deepgram.com, you can try out all the voices there with custom input text as well. And then once you've selected a voice that you actually like, then you can simply pass that in as the parameter here. And so that's how you customize the voice. All right, so then we are going to also pass in our input text file. So let's go ahead and create an input text. So we'll do vim, just TTS input 02.txt, and we'll say hello from the Deepgram YouTube channel. And we'll go ahead and write that. And so then we're going to pass this input file here as our input text. So with all that, let's go ahead and construct our command here. So we're going to do uv run tts stress.py. We'll say connections. We'll do, how about 2 connections for now? And then our input text file is going to be text file tts input02.txt. Get rid of the / on the front there. And then for our region, it's going to be US East 2, because that is the AWS region where we deployed our SageMaker endpoint into, which is the Ohio region. And the name of our endpoint, we're just going to go ahead and copy that from the console, and we'll paste that in as the last parameter. It doesn't have a argument or option name here. It's just the last positional argument in the command. So let's go ahead and give this a try. Okay, so it looks like we got an error here, and as you can see, it's because the user here does not have permission to describe the endpoint. And so what I'm going to do is actually update my credentials to a different user account that should have access to perform these operations. So now I've switched to a different identity here that should have permissions to invoke any of the SageMaker APIs. And so I'll just go ahead and run this command again. So as you can see, it created 2 different connections here, and it sent our input text here, and it played it back on the local audio device. So hopefully you were able to hear that, and if not, let's see if we can fix that. Let me try playing it back one more time here.
Channel. Hello from the Deepgram YouTube channel.
Okay, so that time you should have been able to...
Hello from the Deepgram YouTube channel.
You should have been able to hear it that time. And so if we were to customize the text that we are inputting right here, we'll say, thank you for joining us. And we'll go ahead and save that file again, and we'll just hit up arrow.
Hello from the Deepgram YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Hello from the Deepgram YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us.
So the purpose of this script is basically just to validate that the TTS service is actually working inside of SageMaker, and it can also stress test the endpoint to make sure that it's able to achieve the supported number of concurrent connections for TTS. That's why we can specify multiple connections right here. So I could go up to maybe 4 connections right here. Let's try that.
Hello from the Deepgram YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us.
And it's just going to continue to repeat that until the timer. So we also have the duration parameter. Let's just do -- help here again. You also have the duration, so it's just going to play by default for 30 seconds, just iteratively on the input text. And that just allows you to sustain that concurrent connection count for as long as you want to. And then you can look at your CloudWatch metrics and logs and make sure that everything looks healthy. So that's how we can deploy the SageMaker endpoint into our AWS account, and also use our DG SageMaker repository test scripts to validate that the SageMaker endpoint is working correctly and that we can integrate our business application with the Aura-2 TTS model. So feel free to take the TTS stress test code and use this and adapt it to your business application. It does use the AWS SDK to interact with the SageMaker service because it's actually an AWS API on the outside. However, we also do have Deepgram SDKs that include a SageMaker transport. So you can also go out to our documentation at developers.deepgram.com, go over to the home section here, and we have an SDKs section here, and there's a Python SDK, for example, that you can import and use to interact with the SageMaker backend or transport layer. So that's how you can build your own business application and then integrate it with a SageMaker endpoint that is totally isolated and air-gapped to your specific AWS account. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at support@deepgram.com. You can also leave a comment down below, and somebody from Deepgram should see that and be able to respond to it. And we also have a Deepgram Discord community that you're welcome to join as well. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.